a lot of people are fascinated, as I am, with the relationship between income and happiness.
Okay.
Now, if you look at the scientific literature when they're talking about happiness, they'll refer to this as subjective well-being.
Okay.
Well, actually, let me step back and say that there's a few different ways that happiness is thought of and measured. Commonly, you'll see it described as subjective well-being, but the actual measurements themselves could be things like positive affect. What's positive affect? Positive affect is simply positive emotions.
Okay.
But another way that happiness is measured is by asking people, imagine that there's a ladder with zero that has 10 steps, 0 to 10. 10 represents the best possible life that you could live. 0 is, worst possible life. And they'll ask people to rate their lives based on that ladder. And then that score can be a type of measure for happiness. Now, Craig, you're sitting there thinking, why in the world is Donovan telling me all these things? I asked him for some simple key takeaways.
No, these are good takeaways.
The reason why is because the interesting literature on income and well-being actually compares positive affect and also this rating scale. So we call that life evaluation. How well do you feel like you're actually living your life? Around 2010, Daniel Kahneman, who probably many listeners will remember, famous economist, writer of Thinking Fast and Slow, he and Angus Deaton produced some research that suggested that happiness or income can improve happiness, but only to a certain extent. Now, what the literature said at the time was that once you get to about $75,000, this is probably where actually a lot of the listeners are like, oh yeah, I think I've heard of this. The literature said that, their study said that once you get to about $75,000 per year, your happiness measured by positive affect, so positive emotions, it starts to taper off. So you start to have a plateau effect. So below 75,000, as you increase in income, there is a corresponding increase in positive effect. But at that $75,000 threshold or so, it really starts to taper off. Now, the interesting thing, though, was that individuals' life evaluation, so again, we go back to that ladder score, as their income increased, they still evaluated their lives better. So you had this kind of interesting tension where individuals are saying, yeah, I'm not really necessarily experiencing more positive emotions, but I'm, evaluating my overall life more favorably. So, what is $75,000 in 2025? 2025 is going to be somewhere around like $110,000.
Okay.
So if you're taking that and you could say, okay, well, case closed. I know that more income isn't going to actually translate into more happiness. But you and I, who have a little bit of background in social science and research, know that findings previously may not be conclusive. And in fact, in 2023, Matthew Killingsworth, in conjunction with Daniel Kahneman again, and another researcher named Barbara Mellers, they teamed up for an adversarial research collaboration, revisiting this idea of income and well-being. And guess what? The findings were a little bit different.
Oh.
So based on the new findings, it actually told a different story, which has to do with where people lie on the happiness distribution. And so let me see if I can unpack this. So what their research found was that as your income increases, for most people, happiness tends to increase as well.
Okay.
However, it does not do so for the least happy among us.
Interesting.
So again, from a happiness distribution standpoint,
so where you start matters.
Where you are as an individual, what your happiness level is on that happiness distribution. If we have the least happy person in the world and the most happy person in the world, where you land on that seems to matter as it relates to how income impacts your happiness. And so what they saw was that more money did translate to more happiness for everybody except for the least happy people, the 15 percentile or so people on the very bottom end of the happiness distribution, where again they did see that plateau effect. Now, before anyone who's listening to this leaves and says, okay, the message that Donovan just preached here is that if I want to be happier, assuming that I'm not, the 15 percentile or less for
We'll call that the
happiness.
Scrooge.
Yep.
So if you're not
Assuming
Scrooge,
I'm not a Scrooge,
Yeah.
well, Donovan's saying I should really just go out and make more money, and that's going to make me happier. But the reality is, and this is highlighted by the Killingsworth, Kahneman, and Mellor's paper, the interesting thing is, and again, I'm fascinated by the relationship between income and happiness myself, but the actual relationship itself is very weak. And so while it is statistically significant, the magnitude or strength of the relationship is actually quite small. In other words, a way of describing this is that for someone that's earning a relatively modest income and someone who's earning, let's say, like $250,000 per year, the actual difference in their overall happiness scores, it's actually fairly modest.
So they're very well other drivers of happiness are impacting this, right?
Thank you. That's really, really key. That's actually one of the, if we talk about main findings from this class, I think that it is interesting to explore relationships between income and well-being, but there are actually much bigger things that we can do that will, let's say, be a bigger bang for our buck if we're hoping to move happiness in the right direction.
One of the elements that immediately comes to mind from both my experience teaching and experience in life is when we talk to retirees. So often the conversation might be a financial one to start, right?
Yeah.
We start in a financial space about what will retirement look like? What kind of financial elements do I have there, right? Social Security or their pensions? How much money can I take out of my accounts and still sustain and meet my other goals?
Yeah.
But from what you and I were just talking about, it does reinforce that the conversation itself is more about, well, what is a fulfilling? What is satisfaction? What brings you joy?
Yeah.
And so when we talk about retirement, I think the articles you just mentioned and the research you've been doing kind of lean into the joy part, right? Because how can we set up retirement for a consumer or a client that brings them joy? And that may actually be as or more important than being able to generate an extra $500 a month. Because yes, the $500 a month has some incremental increase in happiness, but perhaps if we're living a fulfilling, rewarding life with family, that may be more so.
Yeah. Which is why it's so important for financial advisors to really dig into what their clients value. Now, if I'm meeting with you, you're my financial advisor, and I'm a prospective client, so I'm not yet working with you, and I sit down with you, I'm basically primed to divulge to you my financial issues, my financial goals, because you are a financial advisor.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm here is probably because I have some sort of pain point. There's something wrong with my taxes, or maybe I heard that there was this backdoor Roth IRA thing, but maybe I screwed it up on my own, right? And so I'm here for some pain point, or
maybe
some
you're
financial
about
issue.
to have a rollover, or
right. Maybe
house,
I'm about to retire.
One of those life events that brings people in the door.
Absolutely. And so when I sit down with you, I'm probably primed to talk to you about all these financial things. But I think advisors are increasingly going to need to also help their clients understand, okay, let's talk about the financial things. We absolutely have to do that. I'm a financial advisor. That's my area of expertise. But let's also make sure that whatever goals and objectives we set up, let's really make sure that they're tied in to helping you, let's say, live your best life, right? Helping you not just do well with your money, but also be well, and maybe use your money proactively to be able to increase the chances for that. And the exciting thing is that, the research literature does have some interesting things to say about how you could spend your money that can help you achieve more happiness and satisfaction. I don't know if a lot of advisors are aware of that literature, but I think it's something that we need to be more and more aware of.
So hit me.
Yeah.
How
absolutely.
can I spend my money to be a little happier?
Well, I think one of the best articles to explore on this topic is one by Elizabeth Dunn and her colleagues. And the article itself is called, "If Money Doesn't Make You Happy, You Probably Aren't Spending It Right," which I think is just a lovely title.
That's a lovely title, yeah.
So they outline 8 different ways that spending money can improve overall well-being, but I'll just highlight a few of them.
Okay.
Because I think that the biggest one that they highlight is, instead of spending money on material things, spend money on experiences. So So here's, I think, a way of thinking about this, Craig. So there's something called hedonic adaptation. And this is a framework for understanding human experiences. Simply put, people respond emotionally to stimulus or experiences. If it's a good thing that happens, you get a positive boost.
Sure.
If it's a bad thing, you get a negative emotion. Right?
All right.
But over time, you adapt. And, there's been really fascinating literature on this that, would suggest that lottery winners are not happier than controls or things like that. Here's a way of thinking about it.
Because I adapted.
You adapted
to the new lifestyle.
That's right. So the change resulted in, wow, this is amazing. I can't believe I've won the lottery.
But then we adapt.
You adapt to it
right?
over time.
I think Michael Finke has a really good point to that, right? He has this hypothesis that if you fly in the back of the plane, and occasionally you get bumped up to first class because of you float, you fly a lot or whatever. That bump up, the satisfaction of the bump up is going to be so much fun. It's going to be so exciting, right? You're going to get Sprite in the cup. You're going to get some warm nuts. You're going to get to pick your feet back. It's going to be this great adventure for you. And you're going to remember that. It's like, oh, what a great flight.
Yeah.
Right? In a sea of business travel.
Yep.
On the other hand, if you fly up front all the time, you lose that magic very quickly. And the inconveniences of, well, these nuts aren't warm enough. There's not enough ice in my Sprite. A plastic glass, right?
Can't believe it.
These sort of absurdities that you wouldn't think, but as your framework changes, I've heard him explain it like that. I think it's a good way that I can understand the concept.
Well, and I think it's a perfect example. And I would actually even broaden it just to say the experience, think back to the last flight you had, regardless of whether you're at the front or the back.
Yeah.
Rank that on a scale of 0 being the absolute worst experience of your life and 10 being a magical, I can't believe this, right? Now, Craig, I won't ask you right now to rank where your last flight experiences, but my guess is that most of us would say, it was kind of a bit of a crummy experience. My flight got delayed. The Wi-Fi didn't work. The movie selections were kind of meh. So it wasn't really all that good. If we step back and think about it, though, why don't each and every one of us say that the last flight I had was a 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 10, assuming, of course, that you got departed and landed and you were safe, right?
Landed,
which the vast majority of times is going to be the case. Why don't we think about it that way? Because it's really interesting. As humans, we're not really meant to fly. Right. We are supposed to be on the ground.
Right. That's a good framework.
Maybe
point.
even in the water we do, but it's still a little dicey in the water. But certainly in the air, we are not supposed to be there. But, for those of us who fly, the vast majority of the time, we're having a casual experience sitting down in a chair, maybe watching some TV or checking our emails.
How many 10,000 miles in the air are getting us where we want to go?
We're flying at hundreds of miles an hour and, thousands of feet in the air. And, again, most of us would probably say, it was kind of a lame experience. I didn't really like it. That's hedonic adaptation in play.
Right.
We've adapted to the experience of flying. It's a miracle that we do it.
But we've adapted to it.
And
if you went and took 1920s, one of us, 1920s professor, you threw them on a plane, it would just be mind-boggling.
Yeah. I mean, the first flight occurred barely more than 120 years ago.
That's crazy.
In the context of human existence, that's, nothing.